to do here is I'm going to try to run through the basic information, and you might see me looking to my left if you're watching me, but if you're just looking at the slide, that's great too. So today we're going to run through the mythology and some basic uses of this beautiful plant called Syrian Rue. You know, when I thought about, I've been putting this information together for a while now, and I kept thinking, what am I trying to get you guys to know? What do I want people to know about this? Many people know what ayahuasca is. They might know what Banistrophis caapi is, you know, the vine that contributes to that tea. And when I think about what Peganum harmala is, when I think about what Syrian Rue is, this flower, it seems to have some sort of obscurity within our community. So what I thought about is I really want people to know that this flower, this plant is a culturally grounded plant medicine that is both sustainable and an abundant source from which we can access the spirit world. Now you might see a number of discourses within that. Sorry, got a message here. But we'll get to those in the future. So my 3 goals of this lecture, as I go as fast as possible here, is I really would like you to consider the qualities of this flower and to start learning about this plant. And if you walk away from our course today being like, okay, I know Syrian Rue is a flower, I know it's an MAOI, I know it has these properties, then we've done our job. The next part is I would like to contextualize this herb within a kind of a pantheon of traditions that really helps us understand that we have access to this plant through Christian roots, through Islamic roots, through Zoroastrian roots, through literally the formation of all Western society, that this plant was there at the beginning. And I'm going to tell some stories. God willing, I'll blow some minds. It certainly happened to me when I started putting the dots between some of the potentialities here. And if I don't convince you of it, that's okay. But I would want you to know that this Syrian Rue sits as a really central part of some very prominent cultural traditions. And the last part is I actually do want you to become quite curious about who are the Magi and who are the Jinn. The Magi, of course, are the Zoroastrian tradition, and the Jinn are part of an Islamic tradition that sits in the same milieu, sits in the same geographical region, and has some important things that we'll talk about actually in our next class as well. So if I can do this, I've done my job. Let's see if this happens. So of course, this is the flower. Voila! It is a beautiful, herbaceous, bushy, verdant green flower. A verdant green plant that has a beautiful 5-petaled white flower. I mean, it's really quite lovely. It's called Rue, and one of the reasons that people speculate it might be called this is that if you break the leaves of this plant, it doesn't smell very good. And in fact, as we'll talk about, cattle don't like it very much. And as farmers walk, as it brushes across their clothes, it has an odor that is not very pleasant. One of the things I'll bring your attention to here is if you can look at the seed pod on the bottom left, these tiny little, very compact seed pods hold, maybe 2 or 3 dozen of these very compact seeds that are the medicine that we'll start working with. Just as in your the workbook, you'll see this really lovely illustration. And one of the things I really loved about this illustration for Syrian Rue is that Syrian Rue, when it first grows, is a very fragile plant. I've tried to grow it numerous times. It just doesn't like the Minnesota light. It needs a certain type of climate, which we'll see in a moment. But once it has been established, Syrian Rue as a flower and a plant is remarkably hardy. And I just look at that root system. Of course, it'll throw tendrils out as well, little runners. But that root system is meant to last. And I love this illustration because you can cut Syrian Rue dozens and dozens and dozens of times, and it's just going to keep coming back because it has such an abundance of energy stored within its root system, which makes it super tenacious. And we'll talk about why that's important, hopefully, as we go forward. That seed is not to scale, by the way, which is important. The seeds are very, very, very tiny little things. I was looking for a long time, like, how do I show the distribution of Syrian Rue? And I loved this image. I finally found some researchers that had charted this. When you look at this world map here, all the yellow dots you see are all places geographically, not just that one tiny spot, but within that region that Syrian Rue is growing currently. And so as you'll see, as a medicine plant, it's global. And I'm positive that in certain drier areas of South America, it's there too. Researchers just haven't tagged it. But as you can see, it is literally everywhere. And when you think about the distribution of a particular plant and how it has affected society, such a wide distribution means that it has touched cultures for a very long time. I put a red circle here because this is where we're going to focus a lot of our attention today, which is on Iran in the Middle East. But you'll see that all along the border between Pakistan and India, kind of on the right-hand side of the circle, it grows natively and has for a very long time. Those who might be familiar with the conversation around Soma and the Vedic rituals of Soma might very well be familiar with Gordon Wasson's The Immortal Mushroom and that argument. That's one argument, but one of the things that I'll propose today, and there's very good literature to back this up, and something that actually makes me a little sad because I like the idea that Soma is a mushroom, is that Soma actually might be Syrian Rue because of what we'll explore later. And we'll see if I can convince people who know that argument well. This is a part of Iran in the south that's very important, but I'm not going to go into that. This video here, this picture here, just shows kind of the distribution in China. The argument that I'm trying to show you here is that it is amazingly prolific, and it's prolific for a reason that, again, I want to show you in a moment. But bringing our attention with this cool animation, one of the things that's really remarkable for us here in the United States is that this plant grows here. And that is a tremendously exciting thing for us, because when we think about having a culturally centered, culturally grounded plant medicine that North Americans can utilize without being appropriationist, this plant medicine is like waving at us saying, hello, I'm right here, and I am both abundant and prolific, and I'd like you to use me. And so one of the things you'll see here is that mostly it's in the southwestern part of the United States. I found another great map that shows an even tighter distribution network, that really where you'll see this plant is in these very, and I'll kind of put your eye to this, it's in temperate and dry locations. And that dryness that very occasionally gets a spattering of moisture, or in some parts a lot of moisture when you look at Oregon, is a really, really important part of why this plant does so well. Because that dryness is a part of how the plant is able to go deep, but also not be overgrazed. And when we look at and Omar, I found this for you, brother. This is a plant that also grows in these very dry and arid regions. And the dryness of the soil is somewhat problematic for cattle farmers, and why within the United States, Peganum harmala, the Syrian Rue, is actually considered a noxious weed, because when cattle eat it in large amounts, if they do eat it, and that's sometimes its own argument, but they'll get very sick, and it can cause some problems, especially if the cattle are pregnant, and because it has alkaloids that can harm that when taken in large numbers. But this arid, barren, desert-like condition helps Syrian Rue stand out, because the cattle and different animals will graze and eat as much of the vegetation that they can, but they won't touch this plant. And so by a variety of selective biological processes, this plant, as we can actually see it from radar in Algeria and in Turkey and in Iran, we can see it geographically clusters and then continues to grow, because it doesn't have a natural predator, so to speak. It doesn't, animals don't eat this naturally. And so it is allowed through, decade and century and millennia after to continue to propagate. And that makes it also very interesting because it is all over the place, and it can be a sole plant within an environment. And I want to just put a flag there because I'm going to come back to that when we talk about why this was so prominent within cultures. And it was prominent because it was the only plant within the region that did what it did. I really like this picture here. This was a person who managed to pull out an entire root system. Just look at how tenacious this root system is. It grows so heartily once it gets established. And you sort of might be wondering, okay, Kyle, you're putting a really hard point on its durability, its ability to survive in harsh climates, its ability to be prolific. And the reason why is because my heart breaks at a different scenario. And some of you might be very familiar with the conversations around plant medicine conservation, and I honor you, and I want to continue championing this work side by side with you, because the medicines that we love, some of them are becoming grossly over-harvested. And it breaks my heart. I love ayahuasca. I love Banisteriopsis caapi and chacruna. It has changed my life. It has changed the lives of millions of people. The problem is that once where Banisteriopsis caapi could have been harvested, this vine could have been pulled out from an Amazon forest rather abundantly without any noticeable concern. That's no longer the case. And we are reaching a point in our world where the profiteering that goes into these medicines is destroying our availability to have these medicines and wiping out literal gene pools of these plants. And it's a tragedy. And it also asks us to think about what is our role as people who are oriented to magic and healing and medicines. What is our role in helping to make sure that the next generation has these doorways, these access points? And this is why I'm also sort of infatuated about the idea of Syrian Rue re-entering our dialogue and consciousness, is because while the caapi vine might take years to grow into maturity, and the peyote buttons, they literally call them the grandchildren gardens, because you'll have grandchildren by the time your cactus is already. And the over harvesting in the South, and DEA raids, and the destruction of these native gardens, it's just a horrible mess. That doesn't apply to Syrian Rue. Syrian Rue is in such great abundance and is so hard to eradicate. We can't get rid of it. And so it has a presence that says, hey guys, if you're looking for that particular doorway, come check out me over here and let the vine grow for a while. So this is what I'm sort of championing. Although I love ayahuasca, don't take the wrong message. I am concerned for our future and our children's future to be able to access these beautiful medicines. So this is kind of why what sort of inspired me to bring this forward, and we're going to go forward into this. And I like this picture a lot. Is in a kind of a larger sense, in a soapbox way, there are so many beautiful plants that we simply have lost reasonable relationship with, that we are harvesting frankincense. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. And myrrh. We are losing these trees. We're losing the frankincense trees, because where a tree might be able to take, a dozen incisions a year where we scrape the oil out, these trees are being cut hundreds of times a year, and they're dying out of infection, and we're losing them. And you can kind of just scan your eye across all these beautiful medicines. If we are not careful stewards of these plant medicines, we will lose them. If not in our lifetime, our children won't have access to them. And this is something that I really love championing, about the seed distribution and about making sure that we know and that we can be educated and healthy consumers, so that these medicines survive us. So thank you for listening to that. We'll see if we checked off that point as we go forward. The next part of this that I want you to know is, I want you to know that Peganum harmala is like a panacea of positive effects within both the traditions within the Iranian traditional medicine, but also Western medicine is coming to realize that the alkaloids found in this, not just the harmine and the harmalol and the harmal and all that class of alkaloids, but there are many things that this plant can do for us. And we're starting to get an increasing body of research, I'll bet small, that it can be a source of pain relief. Yes, it can produce hallucinations, but you really have, by itself, it's a really extraordinary amount. It can be a powerful antidepressant, but also one that is cheap and widely available. And this has been used by people who know about this particular effect for a very long time, as some of the research shows. But of course, as you'll see in red here, the thing that really brings this into the attention of our community is that it is a potent, I'll bet reversible, monoamine oxidase inhibitor. I'm not sure, I wasn't quite sure about how deep I wanted to go into this, but I want you to look, if you can take your finger and kind of trace down from the trachea, but don't go into the lungs, go down into the stomach. And what I want you to imagine, you have taken a big dose of Syrian Rue tea, and you've drunk it. And now that liquid potion has washed down into your gut, what I want you to know, and I want you to be able to explain to people, is when you are taking a medicine, that medicine has not even sort of ended its journey. It has an incredible journey now to enter into your system, into your neurological system, but it also has to contend with a lot of factors in each one of our bodies, which makes it so important that when we do these plant medicines, that we understand our own health and what our bodies need. And so once that MAOI, once those alkaloids have hit the gut, then what it needs to be done is it needs to be pulled into the bloodstream. And for a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, it needs to go through the bloodstream and up into the brain. And that journey is not always an easy one. But before I transition to the next screen, when you take an MAOI, that's not just the end of the journey, because sometimes we're also taking, such as an ayahuasca or with mushrooms, we're taking something called a tryptamine. So with DMT, that's dimethyltryptamine. With psilocybin, that's psilocybin that gets converted into psilocin. And those things have to do the same thing as well. And so why ayahuasca is so potent, why when you do mushrooms at the same time, is those medicines, again, trace your finger down into the stomach. Those medicines have to hit the stomach, and then enzymes within the stomach have to decide, am I going to allow this into the bloodstream, or am I going to break it down right here? And for mushrooms, that happens with psilocybin. It gets converted into psilocin by the acidic enzymes in the gut, and then it is able to go into the bloodstream and into the mind. For DMT, why DMT is not orally active, why you can't just eat a crystal of DMT and be shot into the spirit world, is that your body breaks DMT down immediately. And this is where those enzymes in the monoamines, those amines, those proteins, breaks that down and never allows it to get into the brain. And so here is where Syrian Rue comes along and says, wait a second. So what we have here, as you'll see, is you'll have on the left-hand side, this is a beautiful a computer rendition of what an MAOI is. And that those little green tendrils, I am told by smart scientists, are the protein action that does the breaking down. These two molecules, psilocybin and DMT, just don't have a chance to do their full, actually psilocybin does, DMT does not, but to get to their full potential, because they're looking for receptor sites. And again, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm getting progressively educated in this, and it's fascinating stuff. But we have all sorts of different receptor sites ascending all over the brain. So we have histamine receptor sites, we have dopamine receptor sites, we have serotonin receptor sites. And these are beautiful things for us as they're ascending, because as people will talk about with frequencies, is as these receptor sites get washed over with these medicines, they start to harmonize and they start to echo and they start to flash and pulse. And the neuroscientists are super infatuated with what this means, especially for consciousness. But what I want you to be able to take away from this lesson today is that the reason that the medicines are so potent neurologically, when we can talk about the spirituality discourse in a sec, but neurologically, these medicines are so important is they allow this cute little green psilocybin molecule or DMT molecule to kind of get excited and say, hi, receptor, and they jump right into that receptor, and the receptor fires as if it were an endogenous body-made chemical that was meant to be there. And so when that psilocin hits those receptor sites and you start experiencing the physical reactions, it's because the body is starting to process that as if it were supposed to be there. And the beautiful thing is if you look at psilocin and serotonin, they're almost chemically identical, which is its own philosophical treatise that we'll get to another time. But these receptor sites are so important for us to understand, is because when we're taking medications such as SSRIs, or we've already taken MAOIs, or we have any sort of complication that prevents these receptor sites from taking on serotonin, from taking on histamine, from taking on dopamine, we suffer illnesses, and we suffer sleep deprivation, we suffer depression, we suffer all sorts of effects neurologically. What psilocybin, what these dimethyltryptamine plant-containing medicines are doing is allowing us to wash over our brain with these potent alkaloids, and that can help us experience what it's like to have a brain that is receiving either the correct dose, which would be medicine, or a powerful dose, which allows us to journey. So if you walk away, our brains are able to do what they do in medicine is because they're receiving receptor sites, and then they're throwing the neurological wave patterns. And this is where I get to these things. I'm not even gonna pretend I know what's happening here. I'm sure a smart person. I thought it looked really cool, and I'm sure someone could talk about this. Same thing here. Some very smart scientists could talk about this. I can't, but I'm positive every one of you know what this is. This is what we're talking about. This is the dream ecstasy that these plants are allowing us to do, and then enter into this space.
Doing a good job. This is fucking well done.
Are you guys good?
My family.
Oh, perfect. Indra, control the mute function. So,
my family's super against it.
They know these things?
No, they
sorry guys, I can't see. Perfect. So what we are seeing here is, if you look at the whole trajectory of Syrian Rue, what we need to do in order to be able to access this plant at a rudimentary level is, of course, we need to go from the flower, we need to extract its seeds, and then that red paste there is an unextracted red powder that has all the alkaloids within it. I want you to point your attention down if you ever do engage this medicine. What's really important is that if you are blending it up and you make it a tea, I want you to look at the fluorescence of Syrian Rue brew. This fluorescence is a bright blue because it's almost pure harmaline, which you'll see in your workbook is one of the primary constituents of this medicine. But the bright fluorescence is when you know whether it's a bright yellow fluorescence or it kind of has like a yellow green or even this bright blue. You start understanding that the active alkaloids, they're in this medicine, and you're drinking the right thing. So if you ever go online and you order a kilo of Syrian Rue, as some brave people that have done, take a flashlight, a black light flashlight or a black light, and just make sure that the alkaloids are there. And you can do that. And of course, you'll get into shamanic ecstasy, which means if you don't have, let's see if this works here. No harmaline, no shamanic ecstasy, people. And then no burning bush, which is apropos. And we'll talk about why this is actually really meaningful later. And maybe I'll give away the punchline that a lot of theologians ask, what was that burning bush? Because what you might realize is within Judea, there's two powerful plants. One of them is Syrian Rue. The other one is an acacia tree. And the acacia tree by weight is almost 0.8% DMT. And so quite an interesting source for divine, liquid, omnipotent wisdom within the milieu of our biblical prophets. So now what I want to do is I want to really almost not do this justice, and I'm kicking myself a little bit for this because I was struggling. How do I communicate what Zoroastrianism is. This is the tradition that predates all of our faiths. The Sumerians, there's an argument there, but Zoroastrianism is what might be considered an Iranian or Persian faith. Definitely Persian, that predates the country of Iran. And as I talk to people about, hey, do you know what Zoroastrianism is? Have you ever heard it? People usually have no idea. And then I'm like, well, do you know who this guy is? And they're like, yeah, of course, it's Freddie Mercury. Well, now you know at least one Zoroastrian, because his entire family was a part of this faith. And it's somewhat tragically, it's one of our world's smallest religions at this time for a variety of silly reasons I'm not going to get into. But Zoroastrian faith was extraordinarily prolific, and it was the monotheistic faith that really started all monotheistic faiths. And I can't get into that now because of time constraints, but as you get curious about what Zoroastrianism is, I want you to know that this was the progenitor of what we know as Christianity, what we know as Islam, what we know as monotheism. Look at this picture. Kind of look familiar to you by chance? Give me a thumbs up if that has a vague semblance to anything you've seen before. Maybe? Kinda? You see some similarities by chance? Kind of a bearded, brown-haired man with a sun behind his head and a white robe. Yeah, it struck me as familiar too. This guy's name is Zoroaster. And just like other mystical figures who became prophets and the Son of God later on, this guy also received his divine inspiration. And you will actually see in your workbook, I have provided the account of when Zoroaster entered into the spirit world and met God and received his divine prophecy. And I would like to invite you to read that either independently or within your small groups later. But this Zoroaster began what the world's first monotheistic tradition, as far as we know. Historically, we have the records to show that this was likely the case. And it was a very prominent faith, as it allowed people, as many monotheistic religions to do, is to focus who they pray to. When we think about the Kabbalah, when we think about what happened pre-Islam but post Zoroastrianism, it's kind of interesting too, because 50 years after Zoroastrian kind of faded from the Persian Empire and the Achaemenid Empire, we have the rise of the Prophet Muhammad. But this is the distribution. If you can see, this is all in Arabic, but the body of water to your left here is the Mediterranean, and then you have the entire Middle East, from Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Iraq, and of course the kind of right under the 650 is the land of Iran. This is very important biblically because of what we'll later discover about the Magi. I want you to just kind of make a mental note. You see that red arrow? The Magi traveled from even farther east, so kind of in the middle of Iran, all the way to Judea, which was, I think it's the second dot above, right on the Mediterranean, like 2,000 years ago on foot. And I just want you to put a marker in that, is the three wise men who came to visit Jesus made an incredible journey. And we're going to talk about why that might have been. But I just want you to make a mental note of how curious it is, and how prominent this religion was, because these three wise men were a part of the religious organization that spanned this entire region. It was one of the most powerful religions at its time for about 1,000 years, which is somewhat beautiful. This book here, I didn't title this, but their holy book is the Avesta, and within your workbook, we will study that briefly today. I'm going to keep moving on though. And within the Avesta, they have divine liturgies, and they sing to both Ahura Mazda, which is called the Wise Lord, another name for God, But within their chanting, within their liturgies, they also worship a divine plant called homa. And etymologically, we can argue this another time. I would love to do it, but this is where scholars rather suspect that the Vedic lore, that which was soma, was very likely not a mushroom for a whole bunch of reasons. And we can do this individually if you'd like. But regardless of what soma was, the Zoroastrians and the priests and the people that followed this, they, for thousands of years, they worshipped and they paid homage to this oma. This was a drink, a plant. This is a cup from 3000 BC. Again, mental mark. How many petals does those flowers have? Hold up your hand. How many petals? Yeah, that's going to be important later. This is a very old cup in a very prominent place. We'll get back to that. This was a procession of magi that was inscribed in a temple. Again, it was badly damaged from the Iranian regime, but we can see again that these magi are doing something very curious. Again, mental note about how they're holding the vessels and what that kind of looks like. We'll get back to that. Why I want you, if you walked away with something today, I want you to walk away saying, okay, Syrian Rue was very likely the homa that was described in the Avesta because of these following traits physically and then what you have in your workbook. If you walk away today saying, okay, there's a really good chance that this Syrian Rue was fragrant, very fragrant. It's golden green. It could absolutely 100% be pressed. We'll get into that at the end of the class. And remember what I said about where it can grow? It swiftly spreads. And it swiftly spreads because it has very little competition in the arid environments. It can grow in gorges. It can grow in abysses. It can grow on ranges. It can grow in an incredible variety of places. And that is one of the things that really sets Syrian Rue apart and makes it a very, very likely contender that this is the sacred plant that at least the Avesta was talking about, if not the Vedic lore as well. Again, do they look kind of similar a little bit? A little bit of how many petals does the flower have on the right-hand side there? How many petals does Syrian Rue have? Hold up a finger. Yeah, I want you to know that there are not many flowers that look like that in Persia. And so again, can we say definitively that that is the flower? No, but there's not a lot of candidates. And when we look at its properties as an MAOI, we look at what it can do, and we look at the plants that can do anything similar, whether it's a phedra, whether it's the acacia tree, whatever it might be within these lands, there really are few contenders. And so a type of excitement can build up in you. It has certainly built up in me that this plant is culturally rooted in thousands of years of history. And it is the very basis of what we know as monotheistic faith. And you'll sort of get a more connection to that. I'm actually going to kind of skip this because I want to focus on this argument later. But jinn were considered powerful spirits that in Islam were created at the same time as humans. And they were kind of resentful about it because the jinn are obviously powerful spirit beings that didn't like to be held in the same hand in the eyes of God. And so what they did is in their resentment, they started causing all sorts of problems for humankind. That is like the barest bone explanation of what the jinn were. There is lots of complicated things about jinn. The Islamic teachers, even in fundamental Islam, get a little skittish about talking about jinn because it is such a doorway into mysticism. Because if you're an adherent to Islam, you have to contend with jinn because they will contend with you. They're real beings that have a major manifestation. What you see burning, though, within this chalice, within this, I actually forgot the technical name for what that particular item is Syrian Rue. And so this is a very interesting thing that within folk Islam that grew up after Zoroastrianism, so this is in the year 700 plus, people started recognizing that there was a spiritual property to burning the seeds of Syrian Rue that helped them spiritually purify themselves. In fact, not only was it spiritually purifying, but the seeds were so astringent that you could whiten bread loaves. And it was even used as an astringent property to do some culinary things as well. But spiritually, within Islam today, people burn this in order to protect themselves from clever jinn that try to manipulate them and do all sorts of tricksy things. But they also use it to protect themselves against this, which is the evil eye. And I'm looking at you, Indra, because we're going to talk about this. I'm so excited. But the evil eye is an extraordinary, powerful force. I read a statistic today that 40% of the world orients to trying to avoid the evil eye. 40% of the world believes in the power of the evil eye. And that means it has quite a potent cultural significance to us. And what people believe that Syrian Rue smoke does is, as the smoke washes over you, it shrouds you from the sight of the evil eye. And the evil eye, what it is the sight of envy and greed. When people have resentment for what you have, when people kind of don't like you, and they might not say it to your face, maybe, but they wish something bad happened to you so that you would be on a little bit more of an equal playing field. It's that feeling of jealousy. It's that feeling of kind of being bitter about the goodness that someone else has. And when you think about how potent that is in our own life, now look at your workbook, and there's a word in your workbook in the etymological section that was trying to point to this, and it's called apotropaic. Apotropaic magic. What we're trying to do is protect ourselves. And from the earliest days, Syrian Rue and its power, people understood deeply that whether they smoke it, whether they eat it, whether they burn it in incense and fumigate all their living spaces, that it had a property magically to protect themselves, to protect them and their children from that evil eye. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next class. In case you're wondering about some fun renditions of what jinn look like, I think this actually might be a genie, but some scholars snuck it into their research, and so I pulled it in. But the jinn have all sorts of nasty descriptions. And one of the fun thing about jinn is they're not just spirits, they're corporeal, which means they can eat, they can do battle, they can have sex with women, they can do all sorts of things. And so when you think about, if you earnestly believe that jinn are involved in your life, then you have quite, especially as a person within, 8th century Saudi Arabia, you have quite a motivating factor to use apopatreic magic to make sure that these jinn are as far away as possible, to make sure Jahila and the devil are as far away as possible. And some Sufi scholars actually say the house that has a harmal, which is another word for Syrian Rue, the house that has harmal hanging from its rafters, the devil is 70 houses away. This was the power recognized within Islam to help people stay away from Jahila, the wildness, the deakus, the devilry, the black magic that comes with jinn and Satan. And that'll be enough for now. So essentially what we have is bundles of Syrian Rue plus smoking, no jinn, no evil eye. That's it. So what I want to do is I want to check in with you. Very basically, I want to see, do you think about the qualities of this flower? Can you give me a thumbs up if we hit the mark today? Are you curious about it? Yeah? Do you have even the most rudimentary, the like level 1 basic understanding that this flower sits within a cultural milieu that we might need to look at further? Perhaps? Okay, excellent. Very, very low standards I'm having. And are you slightly curious more about magi and jinn? Yeah? Okay, yeah. Fantastic. Well, I want to say thank you for your rapt attention to this, and I'm so excited to continue exploring this. Let's go further. Let's begin. All right. Now I can see all you guys.